The Sentinelese on North Sentinel Island in the Indian Ocean are a fascinating case. Media reports often call them uncontacted, which isn't quite true. They've been contacted at various points in the past centuries, just not with positive results for the most part. I've even heard them referred to as the last uncontacted tribe on Earth, which is doubly false. There are uncontacted tribes, actually uncontacted, and they mostly all live in the Amazon jungle, some 9,000 miles away from North Sentinel Island. But contacted or not, the Sentinelese are a very primitive tribe. They are human relics of the Stone Age, running around mostly naked, using arrows and spears, living in lean-to mud huts. They are surviving as hunter-gatherers. Nobody knows exactly how many of them still survive on the island. Some reports say it may be hundreds. Others estimate that it could be dozens at most. Many modern Americans became aware of these people for the first time in 2018 when an American missionary named John Allen Chow tried to visit the island to tell the tribe about Jesus, as missionaries do. He walked up on the beach singing hymns, and he was, of course, unarmed. He had no violent or aggressive intentions at all. And the Sentinelese responded by shooting Chow full of arrows, and he died on the beach. Now, it's not clear what happened to the missionary's body after he was murdered. The Sentinelese have a history of not exactly treating their victims with respect. Years earlier, in 2006, two fishermen accidentally washed up on shore. They did not intend to invade the Sentinelese territory, but they did accidentally. And the fact that it was unintentional did not save them. They were hacked to death with axes, and their bodies were put on bamboo stakes and displayed like scarecrows facing out to sea. This has been the Sentinelese way of dealing with outsiders for centuries. There's a violent history of these kinds of encounters extending many hundreds of years. Interspersed throughout this time, there have been more peaceful meetings between the modern world and the Stone Age tribe, but for the most part, it has been a history of brutal violence. In the 70s, a documentary crew was met with a barrage of arrows, even after offering gifts to show that they had friendly intentions. They were still shot at. One member of the film crew was hit in the leg with an arrow. In the 80s, a freight ship ran aground on the island during a storm. The crew of 31 nearly met a very grisly end when the Sentinelese appeared on the beach, waving their spears and arrows around. The tribesmen started making canoes to paddle out to the ship and attack, but the crew was eventually rescued before the massacre could begin. And there are many stories like this in the history of the island, and many more that were never recorded because nobody survived to record it. In summary, the Sentinelese have claimed the right for themselves to massacre anyone who happens upon their shores, no matter their intentions, no matter why they're there, no matter if they're armed or unarmed, no matter who they are or what they want, they can all be killed. And I was thinking about this point a few days ago when I saw a viral tweet from a Twitter user who made an interesting point about the Sentinelese. He posted, quote, "One of the funniest things about modern leftism is that it simultaneously says that we must respectfully preserve North Sentinel Island and its culture in a prehistoric bubble, and that if they magically showed up here tomorrow, they'd be Americans just like me." Now, that's a funny thing, and it's a good point. The liberal view of immigration says that a man who just emerged from a Stone Age time capsule and set foot on American soil 10 seconds ago is every bit as American in every sense of the word as a man who's lived here his whole life and whose family has lived here since the Revolutionary War. There is no difference between those Americans, we are told. The only thing that makes a person an American is that they happen to be standing on the same plot of land. But as I was thinking about it, I think that the Sentinelese present an even more interesting challenge to liberal ideas about immigration. So consider this. Every liberal I've ever heard talk about the Sentinelese or similarly hostile primitive tribes will quickly and definitively say that these tribes are well within their moral rights to murder all intruders indiscriminately. And this is not just anecdotal. Go back and read any of the commentary about the American missionary in 2018 that was killed, and there was quite a lot of commentary about it. And nearly universally, the commentary arrived at this verdict, that Chow deserved to be killed for invading their territory. Yes, he was unarmed. Yes, he was just trying to talk to them. No, he didn't intend to harm them. He didn't intend to move in with them. He wasn't trying to claim citizenship among them. But he still deserved to die. He didn't belong there. That's their land. It's not his, and so he got killed. It was his fault, and that was the conclusion that almost everyone came to. This is very strange, though, because all of those same people would also say, just as definitively and with just as much confidence, that our country would be guilty of a heinous sin if it were to kill all illegal intruders on sight. Indeed, most of the Western defenders of Sentinelese autonomy would even say that we are committing an act of evil by guarding our borders at all. Certainly if we caught an illegal at the border and stabbed him to death and then displayed his body on a stake as a warning to future trespassers, nobody would defend it. All would agree that it is a horrific human rights violation. So, how can the Sentinelese be justified in using literally any method, no matter how brutal, to defend its border, but we aren't justified in using any violent methods, or perhaps even any non-violent methods, to defend ours? How can a person hold these two thoughts in the same head simultaneously? Now, I've posed this question on social media and not gotten a coherent answer from anyone on the left. A few have tried to dodge it by saying that, well, our laws forbid us from killing illegal immigrants, but their laws don't forbid them from doing the same. So it's about the law. But this is a weak sidestep of the issue. I'm talking about what is moral, not just what is legal. It's a question of morality first, not legality. And besides, America could change its law to permit the butchering of intruders. Would liberals be okay with it then? If we just change the law, is that okay? Will we change? Of course not. So you can't hide behind the law. What then is the answer? The only intelligible way to defend the Sentinelese and their right to axe stranded fishermen to death while denying America the right to kill illegal intruders under any circumstance at all, or even to defend its border using force, the only way to really do that is to say that the Sentinelese are in some way inferior, that they lack not only technological advancement, but moral and intellectual advancement. They are not as empathetic, not as morally sophisticated as the Western world, and therefore we can't hold them to the same standards. Well, the problem is that liberals cannot say that and will not say it, because their ideology also requires them to believe in the universal equality of all people and all cultures. They have to also say that we're not better than the Sentinelese running around in loincloths or completely naked, chucking spears at people that wash up on shore. They have to say that our cultures are totally equal. We're not better at all. We're not smarter. We're not anything. We're not morally superior in any way. And if anything, we're actually worse than them. That's what liberals have to say. It's what they will say. So then we're back to the same problem. How is it that they are morally permitted to commit these acts of violence against intruders, but we're not morally permitted to do anything approaching that? Now, they might try another duck and dodge maneuver, hiding behind cultural relativism. Perhaps they'll say that, well, murdering intruders is right for the Sentinelese in their culture because they say it is. But it's not right in ours because we say it isn't. But that doesn't work either, because if our culture suddenly decided that killing illegal immigrants was okay, well, these liberals would still say that it's not okay. So, of course, nobody really believes that whatever our culture does is automatically okay because it's what our culture does. Like, that's the kind of reasoning they only apply to cultures like the Sentinelese, not to predominantly white Western cultures. So they will take a culturally relativistic view of these cultures, but for our culture, they take an objective view. They say, like, no matter what our laws are or what we say is okay, here's what's okay, here's what's right, and that's it. Which brings us back to the same question. Like, why? How do you reconcile this? Now, for me personally, this is not a difficult quandary. What I would say is that Sentinelese society is indeed inferior in many ways. These are primitive people who haven't yet invented the wheel, even while the developed world has robots rolling around on Mars. So their culture is quite backwards and barbaric. I think we could say that after you hack people to death and display their bodies like scarecrows. Like, what are you going to call that aside from barbaric? Even so, I would say that they have the moral right to use force to defend their borders, their homeland, and their cultural identity. And what I would say is that they have that moral right because all nations and all people have that right. Their moral right of self-defense and sovereignty and national defense is not any greater or any smaller than anyone else's, including our own. Now, does that mean that we would be morally justified in indiscriminately slaughtering anyone who happens to wander, even accidentally, near our border? Should we be killing illegal immigrants and hanging their bodies up as trophies like these tribal people do? Of course not, because that is evil and barbaric. It is wrong to behave in evil and barbaric ways. We're civilized people. We're not going to do that. But it's wrong when the Sentinelese do it too. Like, I'm willing to take the apparently controversial position that the Sentinelese did a bad thing when they shot an unarmed, peaceful missionary full of arrows. That was an evil act. And in earlier times, going back maybe centuries, when European explorers were still, exploring and happening upon places like this, and I think when maybe we were a little bit of a tougher stock, we probably would have responded to that aggression against that missionary by raiding the island and avenging the blood of our murdered countrymen. Now, I'm not advocating for that, but he was murdered, and murder is bad no matter who does it. That's my point. Still, the basic principle of using force, just force, right? Force within reason, in a civilized way, to defend your border and your homeland is completely valid. That's the position that I would take. And there's another thing we can learn from the Sentinelese. When you set the precedent that you're willing to use force to defend your borders, you'll quickly find that force becomes less and less necessary. Because if potential intruders know that they might get that response, they are a lot less likely to intrude. So I would say that the Sentinelese go rather overboard in the way that they defend their borders. And they can be quite savage in the way that they do it. But the basic idea behind it is a good and moral one. And we could adopt the idea in a more civilized, more moral, and more orderly way if we wanted to. So that's my answer. But, liberals cannot give that answer. They can't give that answer that I just gave. They can't give any coherent answer because their actual answer is that their views on immigration enforcement are arbitrary and half-baked and, most importantly, not grounded in any real love for their own country. In fact, they hate their country. In fact, they have more love, in the abstract anyway, for North Sentinel Island than they do for their own country. In fact, they would probably even tell you if you asked them that it is more important to them to preserve the sovereignty of North Sentinel Island for, 57 primitive tribesmen running around naked with spears. It's more important to preserve their sovereignty than the sovereignty of their own country where they live and their families live. They are morally confused people with clouded minds and treacherous, patriotic hearts. That's the real answer. And it's why they are today canceled. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.